Hello, good day. I'm Andri, and once again on this very platform of YouTube, I am saluting you and wishing you a warm welcome to my literacy and poetry lectures. Today, we shall start with quite interesting series of lectures regarding North African literatures, and we shall try to understand and to make a kind of valuable intro, hopefully, about Imazighen or Berber situation of minority in the Maghreb or North Africa and the quite particular and unique situation in a political, social, economical, and also cultural frame. Although raising a question such as this is may seem as a paradoxical in the case of language groups that really across historical eras and times suffered censorships and hardships and gross violence in colonial and post-colonial times. The notion of Amazigh or Berber minority can be quite tricky to discuss and to put in such perspective, and is largely rejected by the Imazighen themselves. Um, Such a posture, such an interrogation leads to questioning the very relation or relationship or relatio among historical actors and protagonists, and to avoid essentialist interpretations of minority and majority groups in North Africa. So the assigned position, status, and situation of minority or majority needs to be not only restructured but needs to be reconstructed in the way of seeing them in a kind of reciprocal historical dynamics by looking at cultural interaction and change, and also retracing inequality in power relationships, which are not only, as we are mostly seeing this relation, dichotomic, like a relationship of dominant and dominated, but this relationship is not simply dichotomic, it's very much articulated. So, reflecting and discussing something that comes under the term of minority, and minorization in literature and in world's literature frame offers a kind of a door or an entrance to a very dynamic spheres and very dynamic constructions. So we shall be in my outgoing publications and also in coming written publications on Buy Me Coffee and Patreon investigate this very unique, quite rarely scholarly analyzed and treated Amazigh or Berber literature and literary space by looking at the articulation of identity construction and also at discourses on minority and majority in North Africa and in this very North African literacy and literature pool. So both the terms, as we have Amazigh and Berber, are used since the end of the 20th century. The Amazigh and Imazighen, which is plural, tend to position and to stand out in society and in current studies, while the term Berber or Berber remains described historically in the discourse of the research and scholarly domains. The geographical space of the communities using Amazigh or Berber vernaculars extends from Morocco to the oasis of Egypt, of Siva's Egypt, and passes through Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. And these communities also include Tuareg or Berber speaking populations in Niger, in Mali, and also the north of Burkina Faso. So Now, what we have and how shall we approach to this subject, we need to go step by step and pretty gradually and also with lots of caution. These population and population figures for Imazighen were and are lucky of political and also scientific debate in colonial and also post-colonial periods and socio-political and geographical and geopolitical contexts. So the wideness of estimates indicates that censuses and any existing sources are either ancient, far gone in their argumentation, or unreliable. Amazigh people are presently estimated to number between 12 and 25 million. The latter figure depends, which means 25 million, upon a kind of recalculation based on colonial sources and references, and while the former derives from recent censuses that are quite unreliable concerning language use and language practices. Moreover, the large migrant communities in Europe are not always taken into account. Now, while the colonial sources indicated about 40% Amazigh Berber speaking population in Morocco and 25% in Algeria, recent studies agree on lower figures today, and also that they agree with huge differences as indicated in my former publications on that subject. So, according to the Atlas de Minorités dans le Monde, or Atlas of the World's Minorities, Amazigh speakers number 17 million, and in 2008 they constituted 35% of the population of Morocco, which means of Rif, of Middle and High Atlas and Sus, 17% in Algeria, Kabylia, Oura, or Mazab, and 2% in Tunisia, Isle of Jerba and Chenini, Duz and Tozeur, 1% of Mauritania, Zenaga, and 6% in Libya, Jebel Nefusa. And such figures that we now are mentioning are much lower and much stricter than those recalculated respectively by activists and by scholars, the latter usually working on the basis of colonial sources. So we have also the Tuaregs, who live in a wide Saharan and sub-Saharan areas across Libya, across Mali, Algeria, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and there are estimated to be 83% of the inhabitants of such of enormous area, which is very little inhabited. Tuaregs are estimated to be around 2 million speakers in all. So we are dealing, while speaking about literacy and literature of North Africans of these particular areas and these particular languages and dialect framings, we are encountering a lot of difficulties, and a lot of difficulties need to be taken into account. So it seems safe to say that the number of Amazigh or Berber speakers steadily decreased in the 20th century, as it is also doing in the present one. So considering the figures, we have a kind of a situation that the high percentages of Amazigh and Berber speakers in Morocco and Algeria make them bulky minorities, as some of scholars have been written in articles and scientific works, reflecting on the fact as large as and geographically concentrated groups that they are difficult to manage in national terms. And moreover, the notion of being in a kind of a situation of minority is not just linked to demographics but it is characterized also, unfortunately, by inequality in power relationships and also by the reciprocal representation of the minority and majority discourse over time and eras. So, subsequently, as we are forwarding into our subject that is um, concerned with literature and literacy of North African Imazighen, I shall be attempting to make a kind of delineation of the historical relationships between and among linguistic communities in North Africa in the longue durée and also in the recent past. So we shall be starting first, and the most basic thing that shall be considered here while we are approaching and widening our subject about linguistic and also cultural area, the dynamics of the longue durée. So it is quite useful, really, here to remember what linguistic and cultural area and arena is being discussed. The Amazigh Berber vernaculars, such as Chavit in Algeria or Tarifit and Tassusit in Morocco, have existed really in environments and spaces where writing and literacy were diffused since very antiquity, and the interaction of Mediterranean cultures by the time and languages is pointed by archaeological findings by the Punic origin, as we all know, of the Tifinagh alphabet among the Tuareg Berbers in the Sahara Desert, and by literary elements such as the motif of the ants helping Psyche in the famous Metamorphosis of Apuleius, who wrote in Latin language but was born in Madaura, which means present-day Algeria, around 123 and 125 CE. So we shall start with historical sources such as Apuleius, such as Procopius and his Vandal War, uh, a work that confirms the social and cultural interactions after the dissolution of the Roman Empire, often seen in terms of violent clashes, struggles, and the presence of autochthonous populations called Maori. So, although it is quite difficult to ascertain whether archaeological findings and Latin sources that are the most reliable ones point to the ancestors of present day Berber speakers in North Africa. So many studies really find it plausible that on the basis of linguistic elements present in the sources, at least some of the groups called Maori used vernaculars that are called today Amazigh or Berber, if you like. So since the mid-7th century CE, after the Arab conquest of North Africa, one finds the use of terms such as al-Barbar or the Berbers or Berbers, Lisan al-Barbari, which means Berber language, and al-Barbaria, which means the Berber in Arab sources. So according, we have Ramsey and the Maori of the Latin sources, which we just mentioned before few, do not correspond to the Berber of the Arab ones, the latter term being used in a usually vague way, because Arab authors began to create their other during the progressive conquest of North Africa and also Al-Andalus by tagging under the label Berber heterogeneous groups and also kind of confederations of unclear origin, possibly tribal as well as political alliances, and also by developing and making the idea, creating the very idea of the autochthony, if you like, or self-sufficiency of the Berber in the 9th century CE. So, linguistic elements, on the other hand, point to the existence and use of vernaculars today called Amazigh and Berber by the Almoravid and also Almohad dynasties in Western North Africa. So, building on previous studies, we have some scholars who has been shown that a Berber variant played a central role in the preaching as well as in the military action of the founder of the Almohad dynasty, Ibn Tumar, who using it in writing promoted it as language for religious text and for religious occasions. So the language used by the Almohads was called al-Lisan al-Gharbi, which means the Western language. And the Almohads made the choice not to designate as Berber or Berber the idiom they used because this was a too derogatorily connoted term linked to the long-standing heresies of these people, as Guergate said in his work. So the use of what we just now called Western language by religious preachers and scholars in the 12th, 11th, and 12th centuries led to the development of a kind orthographic norms which continued to be used under the following dynasties, and an advanced bilingualism is expressed in linguistic elements that appear in historical and also literary sources of this period. So we have some scholars that really conclude by indicating that the use of the Western language and Arabic in religious, military, and administrative talk and tasks under the Almohads opposes the leitmotif of the Berbers as a minority since the Arab conquest of North Africa and of the Berber language as only an oral language. So, what shall we find? And what we are able to find in the field of the literary criticism and also in the field of the literary tradition, the acquisition of Arabic literacy led to religious written production in Amazigh and Berber, not only in regions under the Almohad dynasty, such as the Sus in south of Morocco, but also in the Mazab in Algeria and at Jerba in nowadays Tunisia. So several Berber manuscripts written in the Arabic script present religious commentaries, religious poems, and also religious admonitions. And most of these manuscripts that were produced at that time are preserved thanks to versions from the 19th and 20th century. What happened over time with the diffusion of the Arabic language, of the process of Arabization of North Africa, and what did happen at the time when this Arabization as a process increased, we shall see in my outgoing publication on this very platform and also on my Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon platforms as well. So be kind, be well, stay and stay tuned. Till next time.